first afternoon session with two very interesting speakers. And we start with a keynote presentation of, I would not be afraid to say this, one of the most influential economic thinkers in the field of finance today. He is a research professor of economics at University of Missouri, Kansas City, and the research associate at the Levi Economics Institute of Bard College. A former Wall Street analyst and consultant, as well as president of the Institute for the Study of Long-Term Economic Trends, and a founding member of International Scholars Conference, or Ancient Near Eastern Economies. He has been an advisor to governments of many countries, and in particular to US government and influential decision makers. And in 1990, he established the world's first Third World Sovereign Debt Fund, which became the second best performing international fund in 1991. Currently, he is known as widely publishing critique of many things in the current economic and financial system. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to present to you Professor Michael Hudson.
I've been trying to think how to make a bridge between what I'm writing about and what you're discussing here. I think the common denominator is that we all see that the current financial system is broken. And it's bringing austerity, and that what people expected from finance capitalism and increasing from industrial capitalism, all of the increasing productivity that should have given us all a life of leisure now, instead is bringing about austerity and the crisis that you see in the euro today. So what you're really seeing is a war of the financial system against society. You've seen the largest money creation in European and American history in the last 4 years. None of this money has been to circulate goods and services. None has been paid as income to workers or savings or to what we in Occupy Wall Street call the 99%. It's been given to the banks in order to compensate them for the loans that have gone bad. So all of the talks here that I've seen this morning have focused upon the production and consumption economy and people paying for goods and services, but this isn't what most money is paid for. Every year, every day, an entire year's gross domestic product passes through the New York Clearinghouse and the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. 99.9% of money is used to pay bank loans, to pay for stocks, bonds, and mortgages, and speculative derivatives, not for the goods and services you're talking about. And so, while this morning, for instance, Trond Andersen, my friend, who we've discussed many years, described the usual monetary economy, which economists call MV equals PT, or money times the velocity of circulation equals the price level in transactions. This is only a small portion of what the financial system does. Instead of the money that you're talking about, the banking system creates credit in much larger multiples than money. Instead of the velocity of circulation, which is simply a tautological mathematical balancing item, you have debt leveraging. Money is debt. And while you are talking about price stability, and what you mean are for goods and services, food, clothing, and transport, this isn't really what's been rising. Prices have been remarkably stable, and in fact are falling in many countries now for the last 30 years. What has gone up is the largest inflation we've seen in history. But the inflation has been in housing prices, stock, and above all, bond prices. You've had a huge bond rally from the time when interest rates were 20% in 1980 down to 0.25% today. So bonds have far outperformed stocks or anything else. But you're not talking about bonds and stocks. That's not your concern. quite properly, you're looking for how you can use a community system or some other credit to withdraw from this poisonous, toxic financial system. And I can understand the motivation in wanting to withdraw from the system. In the 19th century, many European idealists, followers of Saint-Simon, followers of other French idealists, the German Anabaptists earlier, they all moved to America, moved to the West, and after World War I, most of the American socialists and reformers also gave up, moved out west, and just sort of disappeared, rather than trying to transform the system that has become so poisonous today. So the problem is, how can you create a kind of 0.001% bubble when you have the 99.99% system cannibalizing everything? You have the banking system turning itself into a hereditary oligarchy, very much like the landlord class of medieval Europe after the Aryan invasions, who seized the land, took the rent, then the bankers lent money to rulers to pay for armies to conquer yet more land, to privatize more rent away from the community, and not only taking the land, but the subsoil mineral rights and natural monopolies. And by about 1600, governments in England, Holland, France got so heavily debt burdened that they decided to pay the debts by creating artificial trading monopolies. The South Sea, the British East India Company, the Dutch East India Company, the Bank of England in 1694, the South Sea Company in the 1710s, and the Mississippi Company in France. And all of these were basically a forfeiture, a voluntary permitting of the creditors to foreclose on what originally was public property. In Austria, in the Habsburg Empire, you had the Habsburgs pledge the mines in Spain, other mines again and again and again. So I think the starting point to frame the whole discussion that we're all having here today is what is the problem that you're trying to cure? Because the diagnosis implies a solution. My article, what I'm going to say today, is going to take off from what Margaret Kennedy said earlier. Our presentations are very similar in structure, but what I want to focus on is what monetary policy won't cure. Even if I realize that all of you have different ideas about local currency, domestic currency, and others, but there are certain problems that I don't think any will cure. For one thing, they won't cure the current insolvency. The fact that the debt overhead is so large that it can't possibly be paid. You have the political crisis in Europe today is Angela Merkel and the German bankers coming out and saying, wait a minute, why should we create a government monetary issue to pay for the Spanish banks that have all made fraudulent loans by crooked bankers lending to crooked real estate developers, and all the cronies have already paid themselves out, all of their bonuses and taxes. Same thing in Ireland. Ireland was crazy to let the crooked banks that have worked with crooked real estate developers and made huge loans, and then the European Central Bank said the basic principle governing Europe from henceforth is that no creditor should lose a penny, that they are willing to plunge Europe into depression and lower wages by 30% and force immigration just so that no banker in Ireland can lose a penny, no banker in Spain can use a penny, that the corrupt people who have doubled, the 1% that have doubled its share of wealth in America to 72% now of all of the wealth, or 1%, they are to keep everything they have, and as interest grows exponentially, as you saw in Margaret Kennedy's graph, This means that more and more interest is sucked out of the economy to pay the creditors, and what you have is exactly the same dynamic that you had in medieval times of victorious countries extorting tribute from the population and taking over the property and foreclosing on the land, mines, and natural monopolies. So basically, you have finance today playing the role that military conquest did in times past. The objective of banks in making a loan is exactly the same as warlords who conquered England and France and the rest of Europe. They want the land, they want tribute, they call it interest extraction, they want the monopolies, they want all of the means of production, but most of all, they want the rest of the population to be so poor that it's dependent upon them. Poverty is a solution to the oligarchy. It also, by the way, will solve many of your concerns with population growth. You have in debt-racked countries from Russia to Latvia and now to Greece, declining lifespans, rising suicide rates, falling family formation, falling birth rates, falling marriage rates. In America, the student loans are so large, and these are loans that the government guarantees that cannot be wiped out in bankruptcy. They're so large that students are now having to live at home with their parents. They can't afford to get married. They can't afford to buy a house. And so you have debt curing your population problem. So a local currency will not cure this insolvency problem. It won't cure the debt overhead. And it won't cure the bad tax policy. 30 years ago, and indeed for hundreds of years, the governments of all countries raised the money that the government spends by taxing real estate, mines, by taxing economic rent. The basis of classical British and French political economy, from the physiocrats in France to Adam Smith to John Stuart Mill and the progressive era reformers, was all to say, how do we free society from the warping that feudal medieval conquest created? How do we free society from landlords just obtaining rent without work, from bankers obtaining interest without any cost of production? And the focus of classical economics was to distinguish between price and value. Price was the excess over the cost of production that rentiers took, that landlords, monopolists, and bankers took without having to work at all, is a property claim. This is really the problem that has to be solved. One of the central points that I want to make is that financial reform and tax reform have to go together. For one thing, the basis of money is its use and its acceptability in being taxed, in paying taxes. But in order to have this acceptability, what George Friedrich Knapp called the state theory of money, in order to give money value in paying taxes, you have to levy taxes. The last 30 years have seen an enormous tax shift off property, off finance, on to labor. Not only by cutting the progressive income tax, but by dropping the taxes on property, dropping the land tax, and replacing it with value-added taxes and taxes on transactions. So you have the economy turned upside down to what was expected in the 19th century. You have exactly the opposite dysfunctional system in which the debts really can't be paid. Now, I could have called my talk debts that can't be paid won't be, because whatever you suggest here, whatever we do, one way or another, the debts are already too large to be paid. Adam Smith wrote in The Wealth of Nations that no government ever can repay its debt, although some have pretended to do so. And in his day, most of the debts were government debts. Today, they're private debts. And you have a situation where 1/4 of American real estate is in negative equity. The mortgage is larger than the value of the property. So the problem is that you have the commercial banks having moved into a system in which they are extracting money from the economy. They're not productive. The banking sector, and in fact what Americans call the FIRE sector, finance, insurance, and real estate, is not really part of the economy. We can call it economy number 2. The real economy is what you've been speaking about this morning, economy number 1, production and consumption. But the wealth economy and debt economy, economy number 2, is grown much larger, it's extractive, it's very much like a parasite wrapping around or taking over an economy, taking out the nourishment, in this case, extracting the revenue. But the most important thing about parasites isn't simply that they drain the revenue. In biological nature, parasites take over the brain of the host to make the host protected, to make the host imagine that the parasite is part of its own body and even its baby to feed. And that's what you have seen today with the European Union saying we have to save the banks, with the Obama administration saying we have to pay the banks. The economy won't function without the banks. Whereas actually, the economy would function quite well without the banks. It would function with only the payments that you've been talking about, for production and consumption. But unfortunately, this real economy number 1 has been so parasitized that you have debt deflation. Margaret Kennedy showed earlier today the charts of how much housing and goods and services interest absorbs. I can give you an example from the United States. If you take the average worker's budget in the United States, 40% of income goes for housing, mainly for mortgage debt. The ratio is only 20% in Germany, by the way. 15% of the workers' salaries are withheld for Social Security and Medicare, essentially way in advance of the cost of Social Security and Medicare. It's siphoned off as wage withholding in order to lend to the government so that it can cut taxes on the upper classes and give them enough money to buy the politicians. In America, in order to be a committee head of the Senate or the House of Representatives, the politician has to pay the Democratic Party $1 million, and the price goes up. They get the $1 million from their campaign contributors, and the largest campaign contributor sector in America is Wall Street, the banking and financial sector. So literally, politics is now put up for auction. Most of the political campaign money is spent on television, with the idea being that whoever can buy the most television time will buy the minds of the people to convince them that it's in their interest to lower their wages to 30%. So the Obama administration and the Social Democrats in Germany and Greece say, well, our program is to lower wages by 30%, to stop social spending, to stop education, to make you go into debt to buy an education. And they're winning in the polls because they're told this is the most efficient system. This is the degree to which the financial sector has parasitized the economy and poisoned the brains of the entire economics profession. What the bankers realize is what the Chicago School said in Chile. The Chicago School applied Margaret Thatcher's axiom, there is no alternative. They said to make sure that Margaret Thatcher was right and there is no alternative, the first thing the Chicago Free Market said, in order to have a free market financial style, we have to close down every economics department in the country, except for the Catholic University in Valparaiso. We have to close down every social science department. We have to assassinate every union leader and kill every professor and start an international assassination movement, Operation Condor, including the assassination of Americans. This is the only way to have a free market. If you're not willing to kill everyone who disagrees with you, you cannot have a free market financial style. And this is the Chicago School definition of equilibrium in a political sense. I went to the University of Chicago and the lab school. A few years ago, some of us wanted to remember what we were doing as teenagers. So we wrote the FBI for the secret police for the files on us. We found that the teachers reported every week on our political beliefs. These were in the 1950s, our views. My father was a political prisoner in America for reading illegal books in the 1940s. The definition of, you could go to jail under the Smith Act if you had books by Marx or the communists on your shelf. The main supporters of this were, of course, the Communist Party itself, who wanted to make sure that there were no non-Stalinist socialist parties in America. So this is a sort of untold story. So at any rate, to get back to the effects of all of what I'm saying, we're in a period now of debt deflation. The attempt to pay the debts that can't be paid is going to be austerity that you're seeing in Greece, Iceland, Ireland, and now in America. You're going to have a shrinking economy, and the question is, how is there a way of escaping from this? There are only two ways of not paying debts. One way is to let the creditors foreclose on the collateral that's pledged. The banks will take over all the real estate. They will take over, essentially, the lifetime earnings of the population that has gone into debt. So the objective of the Wall Street and European banking system is that all of the economic surplus should be paid as interest. When I worked for the Chase Manhattan Bank in 1964 to 1967, my job was to calculate how much Latin American countries could afford to borrow. What I did was I calculated all of the economic surplus, their export surplus, their taxability, and the idea was to lend them enough money to absorb the entire economic surplus in the form of interest. This is called capitalizing the economy. This is taught in business schools. This is taught as the way to make money, or as Alan Greenspan called it, wealth creation. All of this wealth creation of bidding up the property prices that people thought was making them rich was all financed on debt. So while mortgages went up, so did the debt. And as the austerity broke the whole system, the debts remained in place. The value of the house fell, and many people, families from America to Europe, are now being called upon to make up the losses of the value of their collateral, the debts that they run up that no longer are covered by the collateral. This is the result of collateral-based banking. And one thing that if you are going to discuss monetary reform, I would like you to read what was written before World War I, when there was a great argument between the British and the Germans over what kind of banking the world would have. The British had a hit-and-run system of lending against collateral to make sure they could get paid. The Germans had an industrial banking system. It was called the Mitteleuropa system. And the idea was that banks would lend industry the money to create new capital. Instead of being based on what they could grab, the German and Austrian and Central European banks lent against what could be created. In America, this is not legal anymore. This is a bank can only lend against a secured form of income. The idea was that the stock market would provide equity capital instead of debt capital, but the stock market is now not doing that. It's become a vehicle for corporate raiders to borrow money to buy companies and load them down with debt. What is amazing is that all of this was known 4,000 years ago. The chart that Kennedy showed about exponential growth of interest and an S-curve. These same charts in mathematics were taught to scribes in Babylonia in 2000 BC. We have textbooks. They've all been published that they taught. Now, the amazing thing is that the mathematical models put forth 4,000 years ago were more sophisticated than the models that are produced in universities today. And the reason is that they knew that the debts tended to grow in excess of what could be paid, and their solution was the rulers would declare a clean slate. They'd cancel the debts. When any new ruler came to the throne, from Sumer, Babylonia, down to Judaic times, They would cancel the debt, start with a clean slate, cancel the debts. They would also cancel the debts when there was a drought or a flood or an interruption of the means of the chains of payments. Now, they were able to do this because most debts were owed to the public sector. Throughout the Bronze Age, there was an understanding that finance was basically a public utility and was run for the public sector. And as one of the Egyptian pharaohs was reported to say, if you let the creditors foreclose, then they'll foreclose on debtors who will lose their land. If they lose the lands, they lose their citizenship rights. If they lose the citizenship rights, they cannot be drafted into the army, and the country will lose to other societies that do cancel the debts. And in fact, the Greek military men in the 2nd century BC, by Tacitus, said for a general, if you want to conquer a city, announce that you're going to cancel the debts of the population and all come over to your side. If you're defending a city, make the same promise. This is what Zedekiah did in Israel, went back on his word. It's what Coriolanus did in Rome, and went back on his word, refused to free the slaves, the debt-bound persons afterwards. But basically, you had the clean slates occur again and again in antiquity. The most recent example of one is the German monetary reform of 1948, when they canceled the debts of everyone except wage debts owed by employers, and everybody was left with a basic guaranteed bank deposit. It's easy to cancel the debts when they were all owed to Nazis. Today, the creditors are in a similar antagonistic situation to society, and there really isn't any solution except to cancel the debts. Now, in the statement that was being circulated for all to sign, you were talking about wanting to make money stable. But money is debt. What do you want to do about debt? You don't want to make the debts stable. You don't want to keep the debts in place. You want to wipe them out. I don't think that Silvio Gesell's idea of the stamp plan and the reduction of currency could be applied to the debt overhead of mortgages, bonds, and stocks for real estate. And the only way to keep down the prices of these is really to tax away the economic rent surplus. So the conclusion is that you need not only to deal with the debt overhead, but to use tax policy and to treat the credit system as a public utility, not as a privatized means of conquest.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Hodson. We will have an opportunity to continue the discussion during the panel that will conclude today's program. So our second speaker in this section is Dr. Christian Arnsperger, who is a German economist, Doctor of Economic Sciences at the Catholic University of Leuven and Master of Research at FNRS. The main spheres of his research are the epistemology of economics, the anthropological implications of economic growth, and the transition from capitalism to post-capitalism. Notably, Dr. Arnsperger is a colleague and co-author of Bernard Lietaer, whom we hope to see on our next conference as well. So, Dr. Arnsperger, please.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great honor for me to be here for these 2.5 days in the company of so many highly regarded practitioners and thinkers in the area of currency reform. Bernard Lietaer and I, indeed, have quite recently co-authored and published with Sally Gerner and Stefan Brunhuber a report of the Club of Rome's European chapter, which was delivered to the NGO Finance Watch based in the European Parliament. And the title of the report is Money and Sustainability, the Missing Link. Implicit in this title is the idea that we surely all share here, more or less, I suppose, that we can't understand the way out of our multi-pronged predicament of unsustainability if we don't question very deeply the way our economies produce, circulate, and destroy money. In the short time I have available, I certainly won't be able to offer an exhaustive overview. In addition, this is going to be, as I understand, done in 30 minutes tomorrow. So we don't, and the report is already out, so the overview is not needed anyway. Nor would I be competent to do so at this stage. As an economist who's interested in ecological and monetary issues, I don't purport to replace the long-time experts who are gathered here, but I would like to provide a general outline, a big picture, if you will, of some of the new mechanisms that could and should be created. Just two comments. First of all, I have outside put down a background paper for which this is sort of a digest, if you like, on Swiss monetary reform. I try to develop a much more detailed account of how a country like Switzerland, which isn't tied down to the EU, which is federalist, which has some specific aspect which is also very rich, could carry out monetary reform. That paper is available on the desk outside. Also, I have here, for those of you who after my talk will still be interested in what I said, an error-free version of my talk. The one in the folder, unfortunately, contains a few fatal errors. I'm not going to tell you which, but you can have an error-free one if you want. Now, frontline energy peak experts like Richard Heinberg have finally begun to recognize, Heinberg's last book, The End of Growth, to recognize what money reform thinkers and activists have been telling us for a very long time, namely that a built-in flaw in our money system is creating constant systemic pressures towards energy overconsumption. That built-in flaw we've already talked about, that Margaret has set it out in detail, is the interest-based circulation of bank debt money that is of about between 50 and 90% of the whole money in circulation in our daily lives. Because everyone needs to repay the yearly interest on their loans, and because due to the fact that private banks are for-profit firms, new loans keep being reissued as long as confidence is sufficiently high, we know that there's a general scramble for currency, since everyone tries to extract a corresponding surplus from their transaction, and since many fail to do so, and need to go deeper into debt in order to keep ahead of their interest payments, the whole economy is really geared systemically and not just incidentally towards exponential growth. That much is clear, and I think that should be a clear background, a piece of background knowledge for all of us. And this has little, if anything, to do with people's greed or with the alleged nature of humans. It has to do, in my opinion, with a choice of institutional design in which the production of the public good, represented by the availability of payment power in the economy, has been entrusted to, and that's a political choice, to for-profit private agents. Now, at the microeconomic level, this problem isn't so visible, and interest many times seems legitimate, justified, you know, but however, at the macroeconomic level, using debt money, and Michael has just driven this home again quite graphically, using debt money as the main mechanism for the issuance of currency turns out to be highly problematic, to say the least. Now, in essence, the problem of unsustainability stems from the existence of wrong incentives within the existing money system. Bank debt money circulation implies, in the words of the ecological economist Herman Daly, a process of increasingly uneconomic growth. Energy efficiency is certainly desirable along a transition path, but the main issue is how we are going to finance the corresponding investments, and even more importantly, whether the way we finance them is going to stand in our way once we move beyond energy efficiency towards a, the relocalization of economic activities, the generalized reduction in material throughput and output. That is, once we need to move from quantitative growth to qualitative development, to borrow another of Daly's expressions. What sorts of currencies do we need in our wealthy, developed economies so that we can finance and maintain a stationary, more or less stationary economic system. That to me is one of the really main crucial questions of the time, at least for our rich, wealthy economies. Okay? Our businesses want to grow because they want to be able to pay out dividends to their shareholders so that they can in the future obtain fresh capital by issuing new shares, and because they want to be able to pay back, they have to be able to pay back principal plus interest to their banks so that they can in the future obtain new loans. Now, why might they constantly need fresh capital and new loans? Well, because first, they need to compete with each other for market shares. And this forces them to invest constantly so that they can generate the needed labor productivity hikes. Okay. Second, they have to face ever-increasing energy costs, which endangers their cash flows, and which forces them to invest constantly so they can generate the needed energy efficiency tax. Now, the resulting macroeconomic growth imperative, of course, means that since the mere creation of nominal growth through inflation is self-defeating, it means that material output needs to increase even when per unit throughput falls. Which means, energy efficiency isn't all that matters, to say the least. And this leads to the well-known rebound effect, in which energy consumption continues to increase despite substantial efficiency gains. So we seem to be locked into a systemic logic in which the generalized need to get one's hands on a currency, which is made artificially scarce, selectively scarce by for-profit bank credit, that generalized need generates a constant race for more, making, I think, the dream of absolute energy production decoupling a mere fantasy. We don't just need to consume less energy per unit produced, we need to produce fewer units. You may ask, fewer units of what? Well, the answer is fewer units of that abstract general commodity that gets produced every year in our economies, and whose quantity we never observe firsthand. We deduce it by deflating the total value added in the economy, the nominal GDP, for which we have data, by the famous consumer price index to obtain the real GDP, which is a mere statistical construction, as you all know, representing an abstract general commodity. Sorry, Michael, I'm going to be going back to the quantity equation. Well, okay. In fact, money GDP, to me, is nothing more, it's not really a measure of performance or something to be valued in itself. It's just the accounting magnitude that measures how many velocity-adjusted currency units, written M times V in technical economic language, were used to effect all the monetary transactions, written P times Q, which economic agents, consumers, businesses, and government deemed necessary or desirable that year. Monetary transactions, not all that's useful or all that's good. Okay. So it has nothing to do with, of course, with well-being, or at least nothing direct. Real GDP, therefore, is nothing more than an artificially constructed aggregate measure of all the units of goods and services which were were purchased by the money that was in circulation at the given general price level, and this can be simply written as you are seeing. Okay, just change the equation around. If we call E the amount of energy consumed, capital E, and lowercase e the energy efficiency of the economy, we get simply, another identity here, which is simply that energy, this equation which says that the energy consumed is a function of all these parameters, including energy efficiency, of course. Now, energy consumption as a result can be reduced. This is tautological, it's very simple. through higher efficiency, lower per unit throughput through a higher lowercase e, or through lower output. There's not much more that can be done. If there's inflation and no additional money, which could be the case if energy prices soar, then energy consumption will drop because real output necessarily decreases unless people use each existing monetary unit more often, unless the velocity increases. Just tautological reason here. Now, I think this simple equation allows us to somewhat visualize what the monetary reform proposal of plain money, in German Vollgeld, which was, for instance, developed by James Robertson and Joseph Huber in a report of the New Economics Foundation in 2000. What that monetary reform proposal could induce in combination with the generalization of sustainability-oriented banking. These are the two first components of the type of money presentation. Okay? Suppose that, first of all, there's a public-minded central bank, or a sort of currency board, okay, which becomes the sole issuer of the national currency, so that banks become mere money brokers who can no longer create new sight deposits through credit, which is the main aspect of the plain money reform. Okay? Secondly, suppose that banks can only, that's also a crucial aspect, banks can only lend money that they first borrowed off, I'll simplify, they can also borrow from the central bank, and so just suppose, to simplify it, they have to borrow it off the sight deposits of their clients and channel it into savings deposits. Okay? And lastly, suppose that clients put their money into savings accounts and want that money, if they do put it into savings accounts, they effectively hand over to their bank for lending purposes, to be invested in energy efficiency projects. Okay? Then we could easily imagine that there's no public creation of additional money. Let's suppose, let's simplify it in the extreme. Okay? This is an idealized little thought experiment. Okay? No additional creation of money. Okay? There is an amount delta C of credit corresponding to sustainability-oriented credit creation by banks. Okay? And it's absolutely crucial to note that in a very simple way, in this model, in the Huber-Robertson model, you can have delta C positive, you can have credit creation that goes along precisely with zero money creation by the state. Okay? Banks can generate credit only by shifting sight deposits into time deposits. That is, they borrow the money from their clients and they create a scriptural shift from one type of account to another without increasing the money supply. Okay? It can be then that as a result, E is going to increase, the energy efficiency is going to increase by an amount corresponding, to the new investments that were financed. Now, given that, which means that the banks were sort of successful in doing a competent job at channeling savings into good projects, if moreover, the velocity is constant, which we could assume, which is often assumed in monetary economics, while the price level increases strongly due, among other things which are crucial here, higher oil and gas prices, for instance, then just simply tautologically, we will get a negative growth rate for energy consumption. Okay, in other words, credit creation for sustainability purposes can lead not just to higher energy efficiency, but to a net decrease in total energy consumption in the economy under the assumption, which is sort of extreme for now, okay, that money creation